Les Stroud spent 10 years alone in the worst places on Earth. Jaguars circled his camp in the Amazon. Lions stalked him through the night in Africa. In the Kalahari, his body temperature climbed to a level that should have killed him. And through all of it, he carried 60 pounds of camera gear on his own back, with no crew, no safety net, and no second chances. Then, in 2008, he stopped. At 64, Les is finally telling the full story. The hidden injuries, the parasites that never left him, the one decision that ended Survivorman for good. Les Stroud did not come from some wild and distant place. He was born on October 20th, 1961, in Mimico, a working-class neighborhood in Toronto near Lake Ontario. It was the kind of place filled with factories, modest homes, and the leftover grit of an older industrial life. Years earlier, Mimico had been known for shipbuilding and steady labor. But by the 1960s, it felt far removed from any dream of wilderness. It was concrete, traffic, and city routine. Nothing about it suggested that one day, a survival legend would come out of it. And that is what makes the beginning so interesting. The boy who would one day become known around the world for living alone in the wild started out as a skinny city kid, surrounded by streets, buildings, and polluted shoreline. In those years, Lake Ontario's shores were so dirty that dead fish sometimes washed up in summer. It was not a romantic landscape. It was rough, ordinary, and easy to overlook. Yet that plain beginning seems to have planted something deep in him. By the time he graduated from Mimico High School around 1979, he was still just one more student in a crowd. No one looking at him then would have guessed what was coming. Still, even as a boy, he kept reaching for something beyond the city. Since he did not grow up with forests in his backyard, he found the wild first, through television and imagination. He watched shows like The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau and Wild Kingdom, and those programs opened a door in his mind. While the people around him stayed focused on normal city life, Les kept drifting in another direction. On weekends, he pushed farther and farther from home, biking long distances to the Humber River trails, building forts from scraps, and wandering anywhere he could feel a little less boxed in. He was not the kid chasing parties or trying to fit in. He preferred solo hikes, creek walks, and quiet escapes. At the same time, music was also getting its grip on him. Around grade 7, as school studies brought things like Jesus Christ Superstar into his world, another spark lit up. Soon he was balancing two strong pulls inside him. One came from sound, rhythm, and songwriting. The other came from dirt, water, and silence. By the time he was 14, he was holding a guitar in one hand and chasing the outdoors with the other. To a lot of people around him, he probably seemed unusual. His family did not share his obsession with the wild, and his neighbors did not really understand it either. But that loneliness mattered. It forced him to rely on himself early, and that self-reliance would shape everything that came later. After high school, music took center stage. Les went to Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, and joined the Music Industry Arts program from 1979 to 1981. It was a serious program built around recording, production, performance, and artist development. There was nothing about survival in it. This was a path aimed straight at the music business, and for a while, it looked like that would become his whole life. He studied the technical side of music, learned how studios worked, and moved deeper into a world where success meant records, stages, and industry connections. The timing made it even more exciting because the early 1980s were full of change. MTV was rising, music video culture was exploding, and the dream of making it suddenly felt bigger and closer. And Les was not standing at the edge of that world. He was getting inside it. After college, he moved into real work in music and media. He landed a job in Toronto as an associate producer at Much Music, right when music television was taking off. While a lot of people his age were still trying to figure things out, he was already managing shoots and working in the middle of a fast-moving cultural wave. The sets were chaotic, the energy was high, and the whole scene was buzzing. By the mid-1980s, Much Music had become a huge force, and Les was right there in it, building a career. His work soon connected him with major names. He handled production on music videos for artists like Rush and Corey Hart, which placed him near the center of Canada's rock world. Budgets were large, expectations were high, and he was trusted with serious responsibility. For someone in his early 20s, it was a big deal. He was not just dreaming about the music business anymore, he was living inside it. He also played lead guitar and wrote songs, pushing his own musical ambitions forward at the same time. That part matters because music was never just a side hobby for him. It was his first real identity. He wrote songs that drew real attention. His work was published by major companies like BMG and RCA. And there was even a moment when his material was being shopped to Bruce Springsteen. That was not some fantasy he made up later. It was a real chance, and it came during a period when Springsteen was at an enormous peak. Les also played in bands like New Regime, where he worked as a guitarist and songwriter, and for a while it looked like that road might carry him far. New Regime signed an RCA deal not long after his time with them, and their success kept growing after he left. He also played in Diamond Dogs, a David Bowie tribute band, where he sharpened his stage presence and showed a side of himself that many Survival fans would never imagine. Night after night, he lived inside loud rooms, guitars, lights, and applause. But while all of that was happening, another side of life kept grounding him in a very different way. To pay the bills, he also worked as a garbage collector in Toronto from 1981 to 1985. And that detail changes the picture completely. On one side, he was chasing music, producing shoots, writing songs, and brushing against stardom. On the other side, he was waking up before dawn, hauling trash through freezing winters, dealing with stink, rats, long routes, and heavy bins. It was exhausting, dirty work, yet it taught him things that would stay with him. It taught him discipline. It taught him humility. It taught him how to keep moving when conditions were miserable. Long before audiences watched him improvise in the wilderness, he was already learning how to function in hard physical reality. So by the mid-1980s, Les Stroud was living two lives at once. One was built around music, cameras, bands, and possibility. The other was built around labor, grit, and survival in a more ordinary form. And then came the moment that changed everything. Sometime in the late 1980s, after taking a wilderness survival course through Humber College, he went on a canoe trip to Temagami in northern Ontario. That trip did not just impress him. It reached into him and rearranged something. Surrounded by old pine forests, deep lakes, swarms of black flies, and the kind of silence city life never gives you, he felt something click into place. The noise of his urban life began to feel hollow. The music scene that had once looked exciting now felt closed in and artificial. Out there, in the rawness of the land, he felt a deeper kind of truth. He later described it as finding the missing puzzle piece. It was as if he had been breathing shallowly his whole life, and suddenly took a full breath. Once that happened, it was hard to go backward. By 1990, he had walked away from Toronto's music grind and committed himself to wilderness, guiding with Blackfeather Wilderness Adventures. Friends who expected him to keep chasing records and stage lights were stunned. From the outside, it looked like he was turning his back on the thing he had worked years to build. But for him, the choice had become clear. The wild did not feel like a hobby anymore. It felt like home. And he did not ease into it gently. He threw himself into it fully. As a guide, he led demanding canoe expeditions through some of Northern Ontario's toughest backcountry. These were not soft outdoor trips. They meant whitewater, long portages, cold weather, remote routes, and real risk. He taught people how to build shelters, catch food, make fires, and deal with isolation. He learned how to move through the land with confidence, and more importantly, how to stay calm when things got difficult. Those years were the training ground for everything that would come later. The man viewers would one day watch alone in the wild was being built there, trip by trip. Around the same time, the wilderness changed his personal life too. On a black feather survival course, he met photographer Sue Jameson. Their connection grew in the same environment that had already transformed him. They bonded through hard outdoor experience, through shared effort, and through the kind of trust that only grows when comfort is stripped away. Their relationship did not form in restaurants or city nightlife. It formed in rough weather, camp routines, and the honest pressure of being outside together. That made it strong fast. They married in July 1994, and even then, they did not choose an ordinary life. Instead of a normal honeymoon, they set out on something far more extreme. They went into Ontario's remote Wabakimi region and committed themselves to living for a full year in a primitive, off-grid way. They built shelter with natural materials, stored food, hunted, gathered, and tried to live with almost no modern convenience. It was a bold, demanding experiment, and it tested them in every possible way. They faced illness, deep cold, emotional pain, and sudden disruptions. There were hospital runs. There was family loss. There was a miscarriage. There were moments when the whole experience pushed them to the edge. But they kept returning to it, and they kept documenting it. That year became the foundation for Snowshoes and Solitude, the documentary released in 1999. In many ways, it was the first true sign of what Les Stroud would later become known for. He was proving that someone could go into the wild, live through real hardship, and film the experience in a raw and honest way. This was not polished outdoor television. It was personal, difficult, and real. The footage showed cold, hunger, labor, and vulnerability. It showed what survival actually felt like when there was no protective layer between the person and the environment. Networks did not instantly embrace it, but the idea had been born. Then, a new wave hit television. In 2000, the American version of Survivor exploded in popularity. Huge audiences tuned in, and reality television suddenly looked powerful and profitable. But when Les watched it, he saw something different from what viewers saw. He saw performance, support systems, safety nets, and crafted drama. He did not believe it was true survival. And that gap between appearance and reality gave him a new idea. If television wanted survival, he would give it the real thing. So in 2001, he pitched a harder vision to Discovery Channel Canada. He wanted to go alone into remote wilderness with minimal gear, no crew, no hidden support system, and no comforting tricks. He would carry the cameras himself. He would film every stage of the experience, including the fear, the hunger, the mistakes, and the exhaustion. On paper, it sounded almost too bare. Executives were doubtful. Some thought it would be boring. Some thought viewers would not want to watch plain suffering and isolation. But Les believed they were wrong. To prove it, he filmed early specials like 1 Week in the Wilderness and Winter in the Wilderness. These were not easy test runs. He was alone, cold, underfed, and handling both survival and production at the same time. He had to find food, make shelter, keep himself functioning, and also set up shots, monitor equipment, and capture a story. That meant the process was even harder than simple survival. He was not just trying to stay alive, he was trying to stay alive and document the truth of it. The footage came back rough. It was shaky, grainy, windy, and imperfect. But that roughness was exactly what made it powerful. It felt real because it was real. Even then, the road forward was not smooth. He faced rejection again and again from people who did not believe the concept could work. Some thought the pacing was too slow. Some thought audiences would turn away from discomfort that had not been cleaned up for television. But Les kept pushing. He knew the heart of the idea was stronger than the resistance around it. He had already lived through too much discomfort to be scared off by executive doubt. From 2005 to 2015, every single episode of Survivorman came with a hidden weight that viewers could not fully feel through the screen. Les Stroud was not just surviving in the wild. He was carrying the whole show on his back. Along with a tiny survival kit that usually meant little more than clothes, a multi-tool, a harmonica, and a few items tied to the scenario, he also hauled huge amounts of camera gear completely alone. There were multiple DV cameras, and later HDV cameras, batteries, tripods, microphones, lenses, and all the awkward pieces needed to capture the experience. In the early 2000s, before tiny action cameras and lightweight drones changed filming, that load often climbed to 50, 60, even 65 pounds. And he carried it through Costa Rican jungle, across the Arizona desert, and into the Canadian Arctic, where temperatures near -40 degrees could kill batteries as fast as they drained his strength. That weight changed everything. Survival was never just about finding water, building shelter, or keeping calm. First, he had to move the gear. Then he had to set it up. Then he had to perform the moment. Then he had to go back and do it again from another angle. A simple stretch of walking could turn into a punishing loop. He would place a camera on a tripod, hike 20 or 50 yards ahead, do the task on camera, then turn around, walk all the way back, collect the equipment, reposition it, and repeat the whole thing again. Sometimes that happened over and over just to create a minute of usable footage. In rough places, that process was not annoying. It was dangerous. In Norway's frozen mountains, he carried that load through blizzards and over icy ground, where one bad step could have ended everything. In the boreal forest, where cold, wolves, and isolation were already pressing in, even a basic scene became exhausting because every shot had to be earned twice. That was the part most people never saw. Stroud said a huge share of every shoot, sometimes around 65% of his time, was spent not on surviving but on carrying gear, placing cameras, retrieving them, and doing it all again. That meant less time for food, less time for rest, and less room for error. On some days, especially from day 3 through day 7, he was running on almost nothing. The body was already weakening, and the mind was already thinning out, yet the work never stopped. There was no crew nearby making conversation, no one to break the silence, no help just outside the frame. His support team stayed far away because the show depended on the truth of being alone. That choice gave Survivorman its power, but it also pushed him closer to the edge every time. And sometimes the edge pushed back. In the Amazon during season 2, deep into the shoot, Stroud was in the jungle on day 6 when he suddenly saw a male jaguar staring at him from only about 30 feet away. The animal did not run when he yelled. It did not back off when he banged pots. It stayed there, watching, then lingered near his camp for hours. In that moment, all the ideas people have about bravery become very small. What mattered was fear, plain and immediate. Stroud grabbed 2 of his smaller cameras and moved deeper into the jungle, leaving behind 4 or 5 heavier ones because he needed to lighten the load fast. The next morning, there were jaguar tracks circling the camp. Later, he whispered into the camera with the kind of voice people only use when fear has gone all the way through them. This is real fear. The episode rules meant no rifle. He had to get through the final day hungry, low on water, and fully aware that something powerful had been close enough to end the story. In the Kalahari, the threat came from the heat instead of teeth. His vehicle was set up to run dry on day 1, leaving him stranded in savage desert temperatures that reached around 130 degrees Fahrenheit. He burned through 2 liters of water in hours. After that, the clock was already running. By day 4, he was collapsing, hallucinating, blistered, and cracking apart under the sun. His body temperature climbed toward a level that can destroy organs. He dug deep holes for moisture and got almost nothing. He squeezed liquid from elephant dung and risked parasites because he had no better option. At one point, the footage caught him slurring into the camera that he was dying out there. It did not feel like television anymore. It felt like a man disappearing in real time. He made it through, but only barely, and he came out of it with a terrible cost. Then there were the lions. One night in the African plains, Stroud settled into a thorn bush shelter and realized he was not alone in any safe sense of the word. A pride of lions stayed nearby through the night, circling, grunting, and testing the darkness around him. Their eyes flashed in the distance. Cubs cried. One came close enough to paw at the dirt near his shelter. He did not sleep. He just held his multi-tool and listened to the sound of raw power moving outside. By morning, tracks marked the ground around his camp. He survived the night, but the mental damage was real. He later said that fear cut deeper than cold or heat because lions carried something different. They were not just dangerous, they felt final. All of this made Stroud's approach stand apart, and it also set the stage for a major divide in survival television. In 2007, that divide exploded into public view when reports began tearing apart Bear Grylls' image on Man vs. Wild. The fantasy of a man truly alone in the wilderness started to crack. A New York Times report revealed claims that Grylls had spent nights at a comfortable resort during a Sierra Nevada episode. Another episode in Hawaii was accused of presenting a deserted island struggle that was not really what it seemed. Then came more details. A survival consultant admitted that a raft Grylls claimed to have built himself had actually been constructed and tested by others before being taken apart so he could rebuild it on camera. Wild horses presented as natural encounters had reportedly been rented from a trekking ranch. Those revelations hit hard because they touched the exact thing viewers cared about most. Was any of this real? For Stroud, the answer mattered deeply because his whole body had become the proof. He was not cutting away to a hotel. He was not stepping out of the story at night. He was not letting a crew prepare the hard parts for him. So, when the scandal around Grylls broke open, it did more than embarrass another show. It validated everything Stroud had been doing the hard way. Discovery eventually added disclaimers. Investigations followed. Fans split. And Stroud, who had been dragging his own cameras through misery since 2004, came to represent the standard that other shows were measured against. He did not hide his feelings about it either. In interviews, he made it clear that he believed many survival shows were produced, staged, scripted, and fake. He pointed out that he truly lived the experience without camera crews and without hotel stays. Those were not casual comments. They were pointed shots in a genre that was quickly becoming crowded with spectacle. As more survival shows copied the look of danger while softening the truth behind it, Stroud became more stubborn about defending authenticity. That gave him a loyal following, but it also deepened his distrust. Years later, that distrust even spilled over onto shows that shared more of his spirit than he seemed willing to admit. At one point, he criticized Alone as staged, partly because he believed medical checks and battery swaps broke the idea of true solitude. Viewers and participants pushed back hard, insisting the isolation was real. In a strange way, that showed how much the Grylls scandal had shaped him. Once you spend years proving your pain is real while others fake theirs, it becomes harder to trust anyone in the same space. By then, The toll on Stroud was no longer a theory. It was written all over his body. The camera gear alone was enough to ruin him over time. Years of carrying 50 to 60 pounds through mud, snow, swamps, jungle, and rock left him with chronic lower back pain, damaged joints, muscle tears, and the kind of wear that does not fully leave once it settles in. In freezing places, he had to sleep with batteries against his body just to keep them alive. In Norway, he lost around 20 pounds during a 10-day challenge because the calorie gap became too wide. He was not simply tired after these shoots. He was being broken down by them. Some of the worst damage came after the cameras stopped rolling. In Papua New Guinea, he drank from dangerous water sources during filming and later came down with a serious intestinal parasite. The audience never saw the true aftermath. What they saw was the episode. What they did not see was the illness dragging on for months. Diarrhea, cramps, weight loss, weakness, and long stretches in bed followed him well after extraction. It was one more hidden price, one more reminder that survival did not end when the pickup arrived. Then, in 2015, after filming Survivorman and Son in Mongolia, another disaster struck. This time, it was not the wilderness itself. It was the journey. A caravan crash left him with broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, torn pectoral muscles, and a punctured lung that was not properly recognized at first. He pushed through terrible pain, endured long travel, and even flew home with injuries that could have turned fatal. Only later did doctors fully grasp how bad the damage was. Recovery took months. The bruises faded, but the story stayed. Even getting to and from the wild had become dangerous in ways that most viewers never consider. And behind all of this was the hunger. By 2008, Stroud had gone a full week without food, 25 different times for the show. That number is hard to absorb when you sit with it. 25 times, 7 days each. He described sleeping on rocks and pushing through total fasting again and again because that was what the format demanded if it was going to stay honest. The cumulative damage from that kind of repeated starvation is not dramatic in a neat television way. It is slower, deeper, and far more serious. Muscle gets eaten away. Stress hormones stay high. Immunity drops. Recovery gets harder. He knew his body was reaching a limit. He even said plainly that a person can only do 7 days without food a certain number of times each year before the cost becomes too much. So when he announced in 2008 that he was stepping away, it was not some dramatic publicity move. It was survival of a different kind. He had reached the point where continuing the show might have meant losing too much of himself. He spoke openly about the physical toll and made it clear that he needed to move on. He was only in his 40s, but the damage was already stacking up in ways he could not ignore. His body had become the final honest review of the format. It worked, it was real, and it was not sustainable forever. Still, walking away from one chapter did not mean disappearing. Stroud never really retired from the world he built. Instead, he kept reshaping it. He returned with projects that pushed the idea further, like longer challenges and new formats that still carried his signature belief in doing things for real. He moved into Wild Harvest, where the focus shifted from starving in the wilderness to understanding the land, gathering food, and turning hard-won knowledge into something useful and even beautiful. The danger changed shape, but the curiosity remained the same. He also stepped into public roles that showed how much his influence had grown. Scouts Canada named him Chief Scout, a position that reflected not just television fame, but trust. He had become a symbol of real bushcraft and real resilience for people far beyond the audience that first knew him as the man alone with a camera. At the same time, another side of him kept growing. Music, which had always been part of his life, moved closer to the center. After years of survival work, documentaries, books, and speaking, he kept recording, performing, and collaborating with well-known artists. That path mattered because it connected to one of the quieter regrets he later shared. Long before Survivorman, when he was young, he had a chance in music that slipped away because he was not ready for it. He admitted that this stayed with him. The wilderness showed viewers his physical suffering, but it did not show the private ache of wondering what another life might have looked like. In that way, his story was never only about jaguars, hunger, or snow shelters. It was also about roads taken, roads missed, and the strange ways success can still leave a person haunted. He kept writing too. Books, documentaries, series, talks, and new projects continued to grow around the legacy of Survivorman. So the idea that he retired and vanished was never really true. What actually happened was more interesting. He stopped letting one brutal format consume him, then carried his knowledge into other forms. He did not surrender the field. He changed the way he walked through it.